Hello, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. And wherever you are in this wide, wonderful, beautiful world that we live in, you are very welcome to the Global Sales Leader podcast, where every week I speak to some phenomenal people from around the globe in the area of sales, sales coaching, psychology, behavioral economics. We speak about technology and a flurry of other things in around the area of sales leadership. And this week, I've got my good friend, Jeff Jaworski, and we're going to be looking at the area of sales culture. But I'm the sales relationship coach. But what does that mean? It's all about relationships, it's all about creating that finite ripple effect with you and your customers, making sure that you are a trusted advisor. But that takes time, practice, but we're in it for the long game. We're in it to connect with our customers for longevity. And creating that ripple effect, we have Jeff. You're very welcome.
Well, thanks so much, Jason. Great to be here, and thanks so much for having me.
You're more than welcome. Like I was had my little stint in Google, contracting in there on global onboarding programs, managers, and I was also doing some coaching with managers as well. But Jeff is a global director of enablement at large customer sales. He's also an executive coach and accredited ACEC executive and career coach. So Jeff has been leading a team of uh, people, but I really want to understand exactly what you're doing now because coaching is one of those big things now. And for me personally, I think it's a massive thing to help executive salespeople to get better at what they do. Because if you leave them up to their own devices, that sometimes they get lost. So coaching
Yeah,
is one of those things that we need to do.
yeah, and thank you. And I'd love to talk more about this. And look, I've been in this industry in the digital ad space for over 20 years. I've been the customer, I've been the seller, I've been the sales leader, and in the past 5 years, I've been in learning development, really with a passion for building capabilities and knowledge and skill. And what we found is it's incredibly critical to drive the right behavior change through coaching and practice and driving that sales culture. So that's been a big piece for us, kind of on this journey of making sure our people can really be, show up at their very best for their customers.
Yeah, and I totally believe in what you're saying regards to behavioral change because it is behavioral change at the end of the day. It's from where they are to where they're going, but salespeople have to think for themselves. They have to come up with the idea, and that's where coaching is so valuable. You ask some really good questions and making sure that they find the answers themselves, which is so they learn and so they
Yeah.
grow by their own mistakes, which is but we're talking about change as well and having a culture change. How have you done that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll start by saying, look, culture change is hard, right? So for those watching this, there's not a simple, three checkbox solution to driving culture change, but there's a couple of things I would put out there. One, it's really important to have leadership role modeling at the highest levels to make it a priority, right? In terms of the capabilities, the knowledge, the skill sets we believe are important for our sellers and managers to be effective. The other piece of this is it can't be a compliance kind of check the box activity, right? So if I say, hey, Jason, we need you to get better at X, and I offer you a training and say it's due in a month, and you do that, and there's no payoff afterwards or no repetition, it won't stick. In fact, we found, in most cases, 90% of what you learn in the classroom decays over a pretty quick period of time. And then you get into this kind of repetitious cycle of trying to reskill or upskill again or bring more knowledge. So really for us, the big piece and the big unlock has been really putting focus on coaching and practice so that we are giving you the capabilities you need to be effective, ideally the right set of knowledge to prepare yourself for the conversation you need to have with a client, and then the coaching and practice to actually work on that in the room around your peers and experts in that space before you go to the customer. So we talk a lot about don't practice on your client. And in a lot of cases that ends up happening. You feel rushed, you're building something, you gotta, meet a deadline or get in front of the customer quickly. And the trap that sits inside of that is, especially in this current environment, in a lot of cases, you might say, well, I've known this customer for years. I know what their objectives are. I know what they need. And we run into this trap of going into these conversations, making preconceived notions of what we believe was best for them. And we don't then actually take a step back and say, have I actually just rechecked that? Is that actually right? And go back into discovery and understand, where they're at. I'll offer maybe a quick story as the seller side of where this meant a lot to me, and where the coaching and practice, I hope, is become helpful on the other side of this. So as I mentioned before, I've sat on both sides. So I've listened to the pitch. I've listened to the pitch. I've been the one to pitch. And now I'm in a space where, ideally we help prepare people to pitch more effectively. And one of my favorite meetings when I was the buyer, and this goes a little bit back, so you can pick on me if you want, but if you remember the days where people would print out their slides,
yep,
and they'd bind it, right, and then they come into the room and they pass out their
showing your age,
yeah, exactly, pass out their materials, and you sit all around the room and you're not even looking at each other.
Yeah.
You're just flipping through it, or you're looking at the slides and flipping through it. And, this sales rep did that. And then he had this moment where he said, you know what, let's just put this to the side and have a conversation. And I my body language, I felt it just change. And I was like, great, because I just go through all these meetings hearing about you and you and you and why you're better and why I should spend money with you, but you're not listening to me. You don't actually know what's important right now. So really, being in that discovery, truly understanding, listening, hearing our customers, especially in this moment, is critical. And I think oftentimes our sellers and managers, we focus too much on moving fast and building slides and giving data points and trying to close deals, which is of course important, but not stepping back and thinking through the entire kind of cycle of things, and the importance of asking the right questions, truly listening, and then increasing your confidence in terms of bringing the right solution to bear for your customer.
What you just said is completely in line with myself. Clients and customers don't want death by PowerPoint. Send the slides ahead. This is what we will be speaking on. If you have any questions on that, that's fine. But let's get into real deep conversation about your challenges, where you're actually at, your concerns, what we can do to help and serve you better with your current issues that you might be having. Where are you going in the future? What's happening in the future? Asking really good questions. And again, it's listening skills. And I think, and I know because I've seen it so many times, people are spend hours on these decks, which is fine. Mm-hmm. But don't do death by PowerPoint, because clients just don't want that. You're never going to connect with them to themselves. And I think that's just so important. And you're absolutely right. And this, one of my bugbears is what happens to the practice beforehand. Are you practicing the pitch? Because a lot of people just wing it. They create all of this stuff and they're really happy with the slides that they created, but then haven't got to practicing. It's the example I always like to give. If I'm ever doing a keynote presentation, I will practice, even if I've done it before. And I spoke with the son of Zig Ziglar, Tom Ziglar, and his dad used to say, I've done this 1,000 times, but it doesn't matter. I want to be fresh, so I practice and rehearse the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and it applies. We talk about a lot. It applies to sports and things of that nature too. You're not just gonna walk into the game dry and say, okay, I'm gonna do my best, right? And look, I think there's a preconceived notion sometimes that that you are practicing, that building the deck is the practice, and that's not, and it's not, right? And look, I know people don't necessarily love role play, but role play, my personal view is role play is harder than real life, right? So if you can actually do the role play and it's uncomfortable, and maybe you start in an awkward space as a result of that, but you can work out some kinks and you can get some real feedback, and you can do it in a psychologically safe environment where you're actually being asked to make those mistakes here, right? Because I think in some cases, the other issue is the seller doesn't necessarily always feel comfortable. Like, well, what if I mess up, right? Well, I would personally rather you mess up or make the mistakes inside of our room, inside of our walls, and make sure that we're kind of refining, honing, thinking through the delivery. There might be an objection that gets thrown at you. Like, how do we just like hone that and make sure that we're thinking through the right way to address the objection for that particular situation? You might also find, or through questioning, you might find what you're working on is actually not the right thing in that moment, right? So too often you go to the meeting and you find out at the meeting you're having the wrong conversation, right? So there's also this opportunity to just like take a step back and say, what's the conversation we're hoping to have? Get some feedback and some dialogue on that internally. You might actually realize, like, you know what? I don't know if this is the right conversation to have. And that might bring you back to a different conversation, which is we need to do some discovery here to make sure that we are having the right conversation with our customer. The other angle I'll throw out there too is, there's some cases where you may feel confident in what you're bringing to the table. What we often encourage is like, just double check that up front, right? Like, this is the conversation we're hoping to have. This is the value we believe that conversation will bring. Are we on this? Are we aligned? Is this a good use of the 30 minutes or hour we have? What's on your mind, right? And be open to being malleable and flexible in those conversations, because it might unlock something that you can be truly valuable for both sides, and you wouldn't have known it if you didn't actually open the dialogue.
Yeah, I also like to think you can be a little bit vulnerable at times when you are speaking to the client, but also when you're being coached as well. Just if I was coaching someone else, I'd like to play devil's advocate as well, because stretching the ideas and stretching their boundaries and to get them to practice and think on their feet, rather than, it's good to think of all areas, but sometimes you have to think on your feet, because especially when the client throws a curveball in there, and it's good to be coached in maybe all aspects of like a 360 view of the sale and what it could potentially throw at you, and the potential objections, whether they come up or not, it doesn't matter. But as long as you're creative and you're using that creative mind to actually go, well, I'm actually okay with this. I'm actually good with having a good flow of conversation. But again, it's that rehearsal, which I find is absolutely key. So how can sales managers, or sales coaches, should I say, create a safe environment for their team to experiment with new approaches and take risks?
Yeah, I love that question. And I noticed you started with sales manager and then said sales coach. In an ideal world, they're one and the same, right? Now, that being said, managers, especially now, are under an intense amount of pressure. There's a lot being thrown at them, from metrics to meet, operations to drive. We're dealing with a lot on people getting burnt out and stressed, like taking good care of their people. There's just a lot there, right? So, when you think about supporting your teams, there's a couple of things that are really, really critical. One, like, are you building like absolute trust with your team, that when you work through things, you're comfortable with some failure, some mistakes, because it's how you get better, right? Providing a psychologically safe environment for them to do that, and then really like role modeling that as well yourself, and making that part of how you operate, right? Like it's an important element of, and you could easily reinvest time, right? So what we'll hear a lot is like, I don't have time. We don't have time for this, right? But if you take a step back and say, well, let's look back at the time we're spending maybe building out the deck, that we could have said, before we do that, we could have created a ton of efficiency. So a lot of my coaches actually tell me, I wish the seller came to me sooner, because when they go and practice, it ends up being like, this actually should have just been a conversation, and that seller might have already built out a deck, right? Mm-hmm. So, and the coaching might lead them towards, it's a talk track, it's a discovery meeting. Here's some questions we should be asking, or we currently have 40 slides. It really, you only need 5 or 10. So I think it's, embracing and being open to the conversation and the coaching. And then, as you're preparing for that meeting for the customer, embracing the mistakes. Like, and mistakes is a strong word, but like embracing, like, I want you to like work out the kinks here. so that we're not working out those kinks in front of the customer.
Yeah, I think that's good, and it's good to fail forward. I always like the Marshall Goldsmith approach,
I love that.
failing forward. But what you said about time is there's so many back-to-back meetings, which is also stressful in itself. And taking time to block out time is imperative. But what I'm thinking of, I've seen it in lots of different organizations, is being self-accountable for your own actions. Meaning that rather than just waiting around for the manager to come and have this 30-minute meeting, which sometimes isn't long enough, is for me as a seller, is to go, I need help here. Throw my ego to one side and push everything to one side. Can I get help and assistance on this? I need to just practice. Wherever my manager can help me, some of them can, some of them can't. But knowing the resources that they need to go to and saying, well, there is a sales coach, there is a coach out there that can support me. Let's schedule some time a week before or whenever it is good to actually have a good conversation so we can iron out those creases. So I'm mentally prepared. I got a good vision in my head of how I'd like the conversation to go. I can set up the meeting in the right way so they're online and you're both singing off the same hymn sheet. I know there's a bit of a cliche there, but it is doing that to purpose.
Yeah. And look, what comes up for me when you share that is, so going back to even the sales coach, sales manager part, managers come with different sets of experiences and backgrounds, and making a uniform expectation on all managers to be great coaches is not realistic.
Yeah.
Some of them are, or some of them can become great coaches, and many of them, it's not their skill set, right? So part of that is, how do you get to a common baseline level, at least, of like, have a clear and core way to how you coach. So for example, I shared, recently, the grow model, right? What's the goal? What's the reality? What are your current options? What will you do? And it leads you down a path where you're allowing the seller to kind of work through that stuff and not necessarily just telling them what to do, which is a default reaction, especially when you're under stress. You just give the answer, right? The other piece of this that's interesting and what we've been building out and I'm leading for our team is having a specialism around sales coaching, so that you can actually go to a known expert that is literally their job. Their job is, I go to Jason and I say, hey, I need to work on this pitch, and you're not my direct line manager. You're an expertise in the space. You're bringing a completely different and unbiased point of view. You and I are not attached to the same metrics or quotas, right? I'm purely here, or you're purely here in service and support of what I'm trying to achieve. So we found that really powerful, actually. And then within that, for the managers who are really passionate about coaching and they're seeing the impact, they participate in that program with us. And then we have sellers actually go to someone else's manager as a coach. So again, that manager doesn't have the same set of metrics, attachments, bias, anything like that attached to it. They're truly just there to help you. And we found that to be incredibly powerful. And it's kind of that 1-2 punch of like, let's maximize the manager's ability to coach while acknowledging not all managers are going to be incredible coaches. But it's also drive some specialism around that, so you can go to someone outside of your core reporting lines.
I always think I'm not in your bubble. I'm not in your team. Sometimes you might feel a little bit apprehensive speaking to your manager about certain things. I don't know, there could be some sort of clash of personality, or there could be something else. But speaking to someone else completely outside is an easier conversation to have, I found. And I've worked in that space before, and I've worked with managers globally in coaching, and they find it a lot easier to speak to. They feel people feel a little bit more relaxed, and like you have the psychological safety, have everything else, that what goes on in the room stays in the room. Obviously, you have to report back on, hopefully it's made an impact. And that probably brings in the power of impact, and how and what do you need to do to track and measure this for like sales impact on the business? And how's that done? Because I'm always curious about that, because me as an outside working with coaches, you never really see the outcome, and I always like to see what the outcome is, because I'm always curious, because I want success for those sales executives to make an impact.
Yeah, I love the question. And look, I think in general, in the L&D space overall, it's always tricky to actually get to a metric where you're driving like what's the absolute true return, right? So, but in relation to the coaching piece, and we've now done thousands of coaching sessions and have a lot of managers globally involved in the program. The main things that we look at are, are we increasing your confidence? Are you now more confident from before you came in to when you came in now? So it's self-reported, but you can give us a sense of like, was this helpful? Are you more confident in doing the thing that you were preparing for? And then beyond that, there's opportunity, depending on the different CRM tools you're using, to attach what's been coached, what pitches have been coached, and which pitches have not been coached. And are you seeing a delta, right? So are you seeing better pitch rates or win rates? Are you seeing differences in deal size as a result? There's also often self-reported testimonial feedback. We get tons of testimonials from sellers just on how incredibly helpful coaching's been for them. And then in a lot of cases, we'll say, okay, amazing. Share with us, like, what happened with that deal? Like, did you close the deal? Did the deal close for a greater amount than what you originally planned before you went through coaching? So there's levers like that where we're starting to get closer to revenue. And the other piece is, how are customers feeling? So we also look at, where's the seller's confidence at, but also how does the customer feel? Is this actually benefiting the customer? Are they feeling like we better understand them? We're driving better solutions for them. And our sales teams are supporting them in a more meaningful way. And we have ways to kind of, we track and test that over a period of time. And we have opportunities then to compare, is there a delta between when the team is getting coached or has a manager who is a effective coach versus not? So I would put it as like, are we seeing quality from the sessions? Are the sellers and participants happy and more confident? Are our customers saying they're happier and more confident in our ability to deliver, frankly, effective meetings, effective solutions, et cetera? And then are we seeing bottom line impact on revenue? Are we seeing a bigger move on our pitch rates, our win rates, our deals as a result of coaching versus not?
Yeah, I think it's always good to do an A/B test, going back into that marketing piece that you already know about. And it's good to test with people that haven't been coached, the people that have been coached, and to see the difference between the two. But I'm number one is impact on the customer. Does the customer feel good? I always like to look at where the customer's position is, the empathetic view on them, how they're feeling when they've been approached by the executive. Are they professional? Have they been asking the right question? Do they feel comfortable? Was there just really good synergy between them? Did they ask the really good questions to explore and understand? And did they just automatically buy into the process as opposed to being sold? Are they serving the customers in the best possible way? And that's when we know that the coaching foundations that's been have had actually happened has made an impact. Excuse my terminology there, always tripped over my words, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, of course. And, I would also put out there for those watching this, I'll put a little challenge out there. When was the last time you actually asked the customer yourself?
Yeah.
How was this meeting? How's our partnership going? What could I be doing? What am I doing well? What could I be doing differently? I would guarantee, I would bet you most people don't do that. But it builds an incredible amount of trust, right? So whether it's in a meeting or, conversations you're having, checking in on, like, are we having the right conversations? One. And then at the end, like, did we have the right conversation? What could I do? What could I do differently? What could I do better next time to make sure that we're making the most use of your time and our partnership?
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's really good because the reason I love doing this podcast show for all the audience listeners today is giving impact, giving some ideas to all of the global leadership people I listen to this podcast, and to make an impact and to obviously have some golden breadcrumbs of knowledge and impact. So what words of wisdom that you can give the audience today that will impact them tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the biggest one for me, I'm a massive proponent of really driving a culture of coaching and practice. You can do as many trainings as you want and, have someone complete it by a certain time frame to get a certain set of knowledge or skill or attend a workshop. Oftentimes, those are kind of like fireworks, right? Like, how many times have you been to a training and you're like, oh my gosh, that was like the most amazing training I've ever been to, and you feel great about it, but then nothing happens afterwards, right? Yeah. So my big piece of wisdom, I guess I would offer, is think about like the then what. How are you going to drive consistency? It's consistent, scalable, repeatable, and you can drive behavior change and better outcomes over time. And that typically comes with creating a culture of true coaching, practice, repetition. You embed it. It's important. Leadership cares about it. And everyone from the bottom to the top focuses on it. That to me is the single biggest piece, for capability development and culture change over time.
I'm completely congruent in that, because I always find training's great, but what happens next? Has the behavioral change? Are they journaling? Are they reflecting on what's actually happened? Because without reflecting, training's great, but they have to reflect on what's been learnt. And then they need to review that a week later. But I always find them coaching behind training is just so in line, because then you can coach on what's been learnt and make a real good impact, because how the brain works is repetition. And it needs a little bit of repetition, but it also needs to know that you've learned what you've said you've learned and how you're going to apply it to what you've learned. So, Jeff, the question I always like to ask, if you were interviewing you, what sort of question would you ask yourself now?
Wow, that's a great question. The question I would ask myself truly, and remember, I'm also a certified coach, but I'm a directive manager, talker, and teller in recovery. So I would say, I'd ask the question myself, like, why didn't you do this sooner?
So why didn't you do this sooner? Is the question that you need to ask yourself.
Yeah. Like I said, I've been in the L&D space now for, the past 5 years at Google. But man, if I could have applied, if I knew then, even as a seller, what I know now, like I actually feel equipped. I would be a much stronger seller today than I was 5-6 years ago.
Which is a really good narrative to tell people, is to stop and think about how you, even if you're in a small, medium-sized business and you don't have the support there, if you're accountable for your own actions, is to go out and find someone or suggest to your director, we need some support to enable us to get better at what we do, whether that's coaching or something else to make an impact, or they go out and learn to coach themselves, or whatever it might be. Because I just find, like, resting on your laurels and waiting for things to happen, I think sometimes you just have to go out and do it yourself and find ways to learn and grow yourself.
Absolutely. And that's the word, the growth piece. Like, we're all constant works in progress, all of us. Yeah. Right. The moment that you feel like you've got it all figured out, that's the moment you stagnate.
Yeah. I completely concur with that. That's why I think the growth mindset, but I always like to say to myself, high performance. How can I get up to high performance? I know there's a lot of pressure on us, and especially within the organization that you work in and other organization, corporate level, especially now that there's a lot more pressure to perform. And there's a lot more pressure to be the best version and get revenue in, because of other stresses from management and wherever else, the market conditions. And I think that's with a lot of global companies and small to medium-sized businesses as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And look, in this moment, it's, you have to still find the opportunities to slow down, think about the things that you need to work on and get better, and put the right focus on it. Right. Like, when we're under pressure is usually when we perform at our worst.
Completely concur. And I was going to say your final words of wisdom, but I think you just absolutely gave it there. So, Jeff, how can people find out more about you?
Yeah, great question. So, you can find me on LinkedIn, of course. Easy to find. Jeff Jaworski. Would love to, continue the conversation, feel free to reach out to me directly there. And I'll be posting more and more often as well. So, look forward to keeping the conversation going, and consider me a resource.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff, for being on my podcast today. You've been listening to the Global Sales Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Cooper. Every week, I speak to some global phenomenal experts in the area of psychology, sales, technology, coaching, behavior economics, and performance and success, and how you can actually impact what you do in your every sales leadership. Look, I look forward to seeing you on the next time. Thank you so much again, Jeff.
Thank you so much. It was a great time thanks for having me on the show, Jason. Appreciate it.